Welcome to this episode of Vote Like a Texan. I'm excited to be in Bexar County, Texas today, near San Antonio, and talking to Oscar Salinas, who is a Democratic candidate for the district attorney in Bexar County. It's a heavy race. There's 8 candidates running on the Democratic Party ticket, which means the primaries and eventually a runoff are going to be very important to this race. Oscar, thanks for joining us today.
Hmm. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I enjoyed getting to know you and looking at your website and learning about what really brings you in. But let's start with you're from the Rio Grande Valley. You found yourself in Bexar County through life. What has you running for district attorney today?
It was obviously a very difficult decision, one that I've had to wrestle with a lot. I've been a prosecutor for 12 years. I've done everything from, simple misdemeanors all the way to capital murders. Recently had a guilty on a capital murder case. Um, it's one of those things of it took a lot of discussion with my family and close friends. I think the office needs someone that understands what it's like to be a prosecutor today, not what it's like to be a prosecutor 20 or 30 years ago. There's this wall on the fourth floor of our office, and it shows all the district attorneys, back from 1865 to current. And what's interesting is that if you research each one of them, there's a central issue of their time, right?
Hmm.
There was in the 1912 to 1915, there was a cattle rustling problem that the DA had to deal with. And then in the 30s, there was low pay because of the depression and people struggling. And so now our issue is, we have a growing and expanding population. The population of Bexar County has grown 27% in the last 12 years, and we have limited resources. And so with that, our issue is how do we make sure that we prosecute those that need to be prosecuted effectively and efficiently? And how do we make sure that we're using all our resources appropriately? And, I'm 37 years old, so I am the youngest in the race. Yeah, but, when I was thinking about doing this, I, talked to a lot of close friends of mine, and I thought about my grandfather. He crossed the river when he was 16 years old with nothing but 2 shirts, 2 pants, and 2 watermelons. And eventually that gives me the opportunity to, do this and speak to you and all that. And so I thought, well, there's people that are encouraging me. There's people that are supportive of my decision to do this. And that if I say, well, I don't want to do this now because I think I'm too young or for whatever reason, is that me essentially looking at that river and not crossing,
Hmm.
And so I said, well, I got to do it. I think time is now. And I think I am the best candidate because I bring a perspective of what it's like to be in the courtroom today, what it's like to be a prosecutor today. And I also fundamentally understand I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to work with people in the community and our community partners to try to make the office, fair and efficient and effective. So,
Bexar County is an interesting district as well because there is a lot of volume of casework that comes through there that gets national attention in how it's handled, how it's prosecuted. And I appreciate your recent experience in the courtroom because I think AI is playing such a critical role. Love it or hate it, right? It's
right.
in the middle of it, and we need someone in these offices that can handle that and work through that changing technology.
Yeah, I think what's also interesting, right, is, I started practicing about 12 years ago, and not everyone had body cams, and now
Right.
everybody has a body cam. And so when you hear about, cases and their backlogs, it's not only that issue of expanding population, it's also that every case has so much more evidence that you have to go through, for better or worse, right?
Right.
But that's the reality. And so because we have limited resources, we need to make sure that we are using them to the best of our ability, right? And so not every case is a life sentence case. 98% of the people that come through the district attorney's office as a criminal defendant will at some point return to the community in which they offended. And that's the reality.
Right.
And so how do we best manage our resources to make sure that, we set these people up to become productive and effective members of society. Because if we don't do that, we were going to get into this cycle where more violent crime happens in our community. But we also need to make sure that the cases that, do need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent, that we need to make sure that these people don't return to our streets, that we have prosecutors who are effectively trained who can make sure that these people can be prosecuted that way.
When we talk about the district attorney role, it's you're not the lawyer in the courtroom, but what is it that the DA does? And let's talk about Bexar County specifically, just in volume and types of cases as well.
Yeah, so I guess one thing that's important to note is that the district attorney, the elected district attorney, is the highest law enforcement officer, right? But our office is not an investigatory agency, right? We are not a big police department. We are a prosecuting agency. We have investigators that can assist in, investigating cases in order to make them better for prosecution. But what our role is to seek justice on each and every case. And so, kind of what I tell every victim that comes through, you know, a case with me is I'm an attorney, but I'm not your attorney, right? And so what that means is we look at each case by case basis, and see what is the right outcome, and we pursue that outcome. So we are, and we also have a civil division. We have juvenile, we have appeals. We do have very many different divisions, but when you break it down essentially like that, our job is to make sure that justice is done on each and every case. We don't represent individuals in criminal cases. We don't represent the victim. We represent the community at large. So.
Well, and that also goes to policing standards, evidence collection standards, and ensuring that both sides of that argument, right or wrong, have a fair conversation in the courtroom.
Right, and that's a good point. We need to be able to, as a district attorney's office, is to have open lines of communication with all law enforcement partners, right?
Mhm.
And make sure that they understand and we understand where they're coming from, they understand where we're coming from, and that we make sure that the only way that this works, especially with a county as big as ours that's growing as fast as we're growing, is that we all have a stake in this, is in this endeavor to make it the best district attorney's office as possible. And, that requires a district attorney who's able to communicate even when people disagree. Because the reality is, as the district attorney, the majority or half the county is going to disagree with every decision you make because hindsight is 2020,
Right.
and that's okay. But what we should be focused on is in the moment, can we make the best decision that we can? Can we work with our partners in law enforcement? So that includes, okay, what types of cases do we expect to be brought over to our office? What type of evidence do we expect to see? And if we don't have that evidence, we need to be able to send that case back either for further investigation or just an outright rejection. The problem, of course, in our office is that sometimes we hold on to cases a little too long, and that leads to a backlog, and that leads to uh, us not using our resources effectively. We are wasting some resources on cases that we cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and that affects the cases that we can prove beyond reasonable doubt.
Well, and we see that in counties across Texas, particularly in the family law backlog, where there's counties that I can think of around Bexar County that are sitting on 2.5, 3 year backlogs.
Yeah.
And that puts that family in a holding period for so long. Again, right or wrong, it just is a state of flux for so many.
Yeah, and it's a good point, Justin. So one of the things is that, so to explain kind of the bigger issue of that, is we have a no drop policy, right? And what does that mean? Well, that means that if a complainant comes in and calls and says, I don't want to prosecute, we're not going to drop it just based on that alone, right? However, we still have to be able to prove our cases beyond a reasonable doubt. So what I think needs to be implemented in order to deal with this backlog issue when it comes to family violence cases is that we need to establish metrics and goals that the general public can understand what we're doing before we make a decision on a case. For example, case comes in, we need to have victim contact or complainant contact as soon as possible, preferably within the week. We want to make sure that we get to these complainants as soon as possible. However, if we do not make contact or the person is uncooperative, we should have two other attempts to make cooperative communication with the complainant. If we do not, so that means we've gone through the third attempt, and we establish that by a timeline. We send out our investigators either to this complainant's home or place of employment to establish that connection. If in that event they still are not cooperative and do not want to come in, and we cannot prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt, we should not be holding on to those cases anymore. We have the documentation that we are attempting to make every effort to make those cases. But if we can't, we need to let them go. We need to reject them and focus on the cases that we can make. Because the reality is, like you're saying, you've got a backlog of a bunch of cases that we may not even be able to prove, and that's affecting our ability to use our resources on the cases that we can prove.
And that goes back to policing and ensuring they're prepared to get all of that documentation and evidence appropriately. But let's talk about the size and scope of the DA's office, because you did a great job of helping us understand what the DA's role is. But what is the size of the Bexar County District Attorney's office today?
It is a office that has a $57 million budget and 560 employees. Roughly 260 of those employees are prosecutors, attorneys.
And
So,
that we are the what, 6th or 7th largest city in the country right now. So I mean, it's not unheard of for our density, but there's a lot of activity that the DA is going to be leading as the executive
right.
and really ensuring that you're moving that amount of work through the system.
Right, and the reality is we get 10,000 new felony cases every year. And the reality is we have that many cases coming through the office, um, and we have courts that are busy. We haven't had a new district court in the last 15 years.
Wow.
And so what does that mean? We are getting bigger, we're getting more cases, we have limited resources. And so it really takes an executive that can understand how do we manage the resources that we have to make sure that we have good office morale, that people just aren't leaving us for smaller counties with a lighter caseload. In our office, you can get a lot of experience. And if you truly want to be a trial attorney, coming to our office, you can get that experience quick. But
Right.
we also don't want people to burn out. So it takes an executive who can work and who can communicate with all the district courts, with the county courts, to make sure that our people aren't getting burned out. But also managing each and every case. The way I like to think about it, Justin, is we have about four different categories when we're looking at a case, specifically criminal cases. And a friend of mine, Tom Nisbet, was the one who actually zeroed me in on this concept, right, when I was a younger attorney. Um, is the first category of defendants that come through are young, kids that make a dumb mistake and they're redeemable.
Mhm.
And second, we've got some, good productive members of society, but for a lapse of judgment, they're in the criminal justice system and they're redeemable. And then the third is, people who have mental health or some sort of drug addiction issue, but they're redeemable, right? Nonviolent. And then your fourth category are the people that, we're talking about that, that 2% that do not need to be out in the streets. They're the ones that hurt children. They're the ones that, break into homes. And those are where our resources need to be focused on, are on those most violent offenders. And while on those other three categories, we need to see what programs collaboratively with the community can we engage in to make sure that they're productive members of society. Once they get out of the system. So, yeah,
I've seen some really incredible people going into the system and helping those redeemable categories come out and find employment, come out and find that next step. And that's a big piece for somebody's life if they stumble and they end up with a felony record and then they try to get a job. And that's a hard reality that I don't think we talk about when we talk about that behavioral health cycle and how the criminal justice system gets involved. And so I'm excited to hear you talk about it in that way and to say redeemable, because there are people that find a moment of lapse, but they are redeemable and we should nurture them back at some level.
right. I mean, the reality is we know from scientific studies that the male, specifically the male brain, doesn't even fully develop the frontal lobe until we're 25 years old. And, the one indicator to have someone remain in poverty or in lower class socioeconomic is they get tagged with a criminal conviction. So a lot of times we have people who come from tough upbringings, um, 18, 19 years old, and they make a stupid mistake, but they're still redeemable. But because of that, they've now have affected the trajectory of their own life. And
Hmm.
and I think it's important for us as a society, as a community, to figure out what's the best way that we can make sure that these people still can go to their fullest potential and be productive members of society, you know?
San Antonio gets some national attention on federal talking points that we don't need to get into, but can you help me distinguish cases that the Bexar County DA sees versus the federal courthouse that we have here or the other larger systems that sit on top of Bexar County?
Okay. So, in my time at the district attorney's office, I have prosecuted law enforcement officers to verdict to trial. And so there is a talking point out there that we can investigate ICE or and things like that. I think that's what you're referring to. But
Well, that or I mean, San Antonio is such a hub for things that I don't people realize. ICE is obviously one of them, but there are some big federal conversations that happen here that are cross-border conversations that are internationally impactful. But I like where you're going with what you were saying about law enforcement.
right, and our job is to hold all people accountable, right? No one is above the law, and no one is below the law. There are no second class or first class, criminal defendants. But as far as what the distinction is between, the federal system and our system, the state system, is we prosecute state criminal offenses. In order to be in the federal system, there has to be a federal nexus between that offense. So, drug trafficking across borders or interstate, cases like that. So our focus is what crime occurred in Bexar County. And so that could be, like I talked about, we're not a police agency. We can refer criminal cases, but if there is a state crime that happens, and we receive a referral from a investigatory agency, then we can pursue it. That's different than the federal jurisdiction, which there's some overlap. So I was in the cybercrime unit and helped start up investigations with the Attorney General's office into the possession of child sexual abuse material, or known as child pornography. And sometimes those types of cases have a lot of overlap, especially with the federal system, because of it's the internet. It's traveling through interstate and throughout the world. So the feds can pick up some of those cases, but we typically held on to a lot of them that we took, and so some that I tried personally and had some good sentences on. Um, there's some of the kid cases are always the toughest ones for me.
Well,
Um, One of the reasons why I have the black and yellow, there was this, and I don't know how much research you did into me in my website, but there was this case I had. It was a little 5.5-year-old boy named Dominic who was murdered here in San Antonio, and his body was taken
mhm.
to Colorado and dumped over the side of a ravine. And mom and boyfriend fled the country, and we had to use the assistance of FBI to come and testify, and it was a pretty intensive trial about 2 years ago, and he got a life sentence. Daniel Garcia did. Um, and this is one of the reasons why I wear the black and yellow is because Dominic liked Batman, and there's there's part of me that likes me to think that he's encouraging of this run. One of the toughest things about this is being doing this, you got to put yourself out there,
Yep.
and you got to have these tough conversations and answer tough questions in front of a lot of different people. But those types of cases have given me the strength because I understand the things that people have gone through, especially children, and so it's important for me to kind of continue pushing forward. Even when I don't have the biggest backing of money because I've been a public servant my whole life. And
Right.
like I said, I'm from the valley. I went to public school down there at Porter High School. I didn't, I was a first generation college student, but you know, one of the things was growing up, I was a Golden Gloves boxer,
Okay.
and so that kind of keeps me standing up. So.
You learn a lot of grit in boxing,
Yeah.
and cases like Dominic's, I remember the media coverage on it. I remember the citywide, region-wide conversation around that case, and, um, I think that's getting all of our attention right now with the vulnerability of children in today's world, and I would want a DA that really does prioritize those cases and ensures that that's not part of our community.
You know, the reality is that everyone nowadays has a computer in their pocket, right? And how quickly, a child can be exploited based on that if we're not closely monitoring that and things and watching out for the things that we need to watch out for. It's no longer the creepy man in the ice cream truck trying to get kids.
So
It's the one who's on social media that's, texting and sending messages and things and or pretending to be a child themselves.
right.
Yeah, those types of cases, they are very important. I've seen, how quickly things can escalate and the child can be victimized and exploited. Um, and yeah, no, it's, like I said, we're a growing community, and with that, I think everyone in the race, I truly believe wants their our office to be the best that it can because that's how we thrive as a community. If we know that we're safe and that our office is working for the people. We all just may disagree on how we go about doing that, and what our skills are with that. But I think the office requires someone that can have conversations, and find common ground with people. Not that don't always agree with each other. You know.
Well, I appreciated your background for that reason. I think you represent San Antonio really well in the way that you've seen the world and the way that you've now professionally seen the world, and you see what is South Texas. And we have a lot of people, but in today's internet world, we have more people involved. We have more people giving evidence, more people providing information, more people engaged in protecting the kids in their community. And that's positive to see. And to your point, there's a lot of people running for the DA's office in Bexar County. Um, it is important that we get people out for the primary
Mhm.
and more than likely a runoff in this election. So I applaud all of those people for putting their name in the hat. But it I liked your point about when were they most recently in the room and in the evidence and in these cases to really come into today's world? Because I think in the last 5 years, Bexar County's changed so much.
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially post COVID, it's a totally different world about how we manage dockets, how quick cases are moving, how busy we are, the morale. And so it's one of those things of I like to think that, like we talked about, there's about 260 other prosecutors in the office, and 550 employees in there at the DA's office. And I'd like to think that, me as the executive, and I don't like to say work for me, but work with me,
Right.
that we work alongside together, that the people that are in the office would see, well, he's just like one of us because, um, he hasn't he's been just there in the trenches and on the front line, recently. He, knows what it's like to be one of us because I am one of them, and just, trying to make it as best as we can in at the office.
Well, I want to encourage voters to check out your website.
Oh, thanks.
You've done a wonderful job of outlining these topics and putting yourself out there and how you want to lead, how you plan to lead. And I want to give you an opportunity. What do you want people to take away, and where can people find more information beyond your website?
So, my wife manages the website and, the Instagram and the Facebook, I've got 2 kids. What I want people to take away from all this is that at the end of the day, my goal in this race is to someday, because, when they were both born, there was a realization that, that someday, if everything goes right, um, they're gonna be at my funeral, right? And there's an impact that we each have as individuals on our community. for future generations, you know, my kids, your family. And what I want people to take away from this is that I'm running because I want this office to be the best that it can be,
Yeah.
not only for my 2 kids, but for everyone's family, for everyone in this community. I want people to understand that there are no, first-class people, there are no second-class people, there are just people in our community who want to do the best that they can, provide for their families, provide for themselves, and that the only way that we can make sure that our office works efficiently and effectively is that we need to make sure our resources are being used to their best of their potential, that we're working with our community partners in law enforcement, commissioner's court, and all the programs that we have in our great community, and that it starts with someone who has an understanding of what it's like in the day to day. And that's me. Um, at the end of it, win or lose, my plan is to continue trying to do the best that I can for my community in the way that I can. I know, like we talked about, it's an 8-person race.
Right.
Um, but I think if people truly sat down and researched the candidates and what each and every one of us was about, who we are, where we come from, our backgrounds, um, I think I'm the pick. You know, I'm not much of a politician. I don't come from a political background. I don't, like I said, like I told you earlier, I was a first generation college student. So was my wife. My wife, we talk about this. Both her parents were from Mexico,
Right.
and she lived for a little bit in her dad's mechanic shop here in town. We have those types of experiences. And if like I said, if people want some sort of political establishment candidate or a political elite person that's going to tell you what you want to hear, then I'm not your guy.
Right.
But if you want someone that's going to be open and honest, even when you disagree with me, and tell you what's happening, what's actually happening, what you need to hear, then I'm the person for the job. You know.
I would encourage people to come stand in the ring with you. I mean,
Yeah.
party politics fall off real quick,
Yeah.
and I think that's what I look at in San Antonio. The party politics are tough, and I see a lot of
Yeah.
people going from one party to the other, and really trying to chase that political win instead of what I hear you saying. It's really about the work. It's really about the people, and regardless of party,
Right.
it's how is Bear County going to be best represented.
Right. I'm a Democrat. But I think it's in label, right? Because, I think it's important for someone to work with all different people, even if they disagree with me and disagree on what beliefs I have, because we all have a common goal, which is to make sure that our community is as safe as possible. I'll share with you a story. Back in 24, December 24. So my son, he's pretty good at soccer.
Yeah.
And so we go out to McAllister Park to do this separate practice. And so it's myself, my wife in the front seat, obviously, my son and my daughter, and at the time she's 3. And, so we're primarily a Spanish-speaking family at home. Although if you had to rank our Spanish, it's probably it's probably my wife at top, and then I'm at the bottom. But I can speak it, and we have conversations at home in Spanish, and so we're going, and we go to McAllister Park, and there's a whole bunch of deer that are being fed by this older couple that's sitting in a blue Jeep. And so we roll down the window, and my daughter says, "Hola," at which point the older couple yells for her to speak English and to go back to our country. And we're just yelling these profanities and all that. And so I say the story to I know that those people, right, that they're attracted to a certain level of rhetoric and hate, but I don't believe that the majority of people in the Republican Party have subscribed to that belief. And so why is that important in this discussion? It's that as Democrats, as people, just people, period, we need to be able to find the common ground in order to make sure that our institutions are the best that they can be, that we're working together in the community. Just because someone's a Republican doesn't mean I'm going to write them off. I need to figure a way to work with them and communicate with them because we're on this thing together, And I think it's important, especially as a Democrat in a big county,
Mhm.
in a red state, that it's important for us as leaders to be a model of governance, right? That we can say, hey, you know what, our way of governance is good. It's the best. It's for the average person. It's for the everyday person. It's not only for the rich elite, political elite. And I think that's what's important. And regardless, like of all those people who subscribe to that hate, I don't believe the majority of people. I still don't believe that subscribe to that. And I think it's important for us to come together in that common ground.
You're elected by the people and you're there to represent all of the people in your jurisdiction. And
Right.
so it really does take the party label off when we say we're here to serve people.
Hmm.
Well, I appreciate the message. I appreciate your story and what you're doing to run. It is a family event. So thank you to your wife for her wonderful work on the website. And Oscar, it's been a pleasure. I look forward to seeing how the race goes. I want to remind people, vote now in early voting. The primary is where this decision is made for who's going to be on the general election ballot in November. So if you're in the Democratic Party and you can vote in this primary for the Democrat candidates, please do. And early voting is open now through what, the 27th, I believe?
Through the 27th, and then March 3rd is the final day.
Awesome. Well, I know you're going to be block walking and saying hello to a lot of people. So good luck in that. And I really appreciate our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin. I really appreciate the opportunity. So
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Vote Like a Texan. Please remember to like and subscribe and check out votelikeatexan.com.